Hello and welcome back to Satan's Generals. Today we're going to do something a little different. We're focusing mostly on a setting, and the reason I'm focusing on this setting is because it is really what launched John Alexander Dowie onto the national stage and made him pretty much known the world over. Um, the next video will talk about John Dowie more in depth. But for now, I want to set the stage for where he really got his start. Before I do that, I'm going to read a clip from Flavius Josephus because I think it's relevant to what's going on at this setting. And this is about at the Tower of Babel. And Flavius Josephus said, "Now it was Nimrod who excited them to such an affront and contempt of God. He persuaded them not to ascribe it to God, as if it was through his means that they were happy, but to believe that it was their own courage which procured that happiness. He also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning men from the fear of God but to bring them into constant dependence on his own power. He also said he would be revenged on God if he should have a mind to drown the world again, for that he would build a tower too high for the waters to be able to reach, and that he would avenge himself on God for destroying their forefathers." That's an awful prideful statement. Um, and that's how Flavius Josephus describes how things came about to build the Tower of Babel. Now, the setting we're going to talk about is the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago called the Columbian Exposition. And we're going to talk about that because there was that same kind of sense of pride surrounding this festival. And this is where John Alexander really launched his career. Now, this chapter, and I say chapter because, again, this was originally going to be a book, but this chapter or video is both about the Chicago World Fair of 1893 and not about the World Fair of 1893. We will cover here the spectacle that the fair really was and how the faith healing freak show was born out of it. It was a spectacle that would come to infiltrate churches worldwide and create the carnival show that many today call church. The Chicago World Fair really was a carnival, a spectacle, and an illusion on a grander scale than the modern world had ever known. It was located on a city built just for the fair, the White City. The White City was made of plaster and painted white among the filthy, smoggy, polluted Chicago of the 1800s. The buildings would become easily tarnished and need repainted repeatedly to cover the yellowing caused by the pollution. In a very real way, it could be said that the White City was a symbol of the washed out version of the gospel that would go forth from it, filthy inside and out. I'm not certain that I can recreate the spectacle that the World Fair of 1893 really was for you in words, but I'll give it my best attempt. Just as the people of Babylon celebrated their own ingenuity and were ill trained by Nimrod to not attribute their successes to God, so the World's Fair was also a godless celebration of human ingenuity. John Alexander Dowie was there from day one. But before we get into him too much, let's continue with the World Fair a little bit. Um, for a third of all Americans witnessed the spectacle that the World Fair was as they flocked to Chicago for the celebrations. It was held in 1893 on the shores of Lake Michigan. The fairgrounds totaled close to 690 acres, and the White City was built solely for the purpose of hosting this fair. Over 27 million people would visit the fair between May 1st and 31st of that year, at a time when the entire United States population was just under 63 million. Of course, not all the people to visit were from the United States. Visitors to the fair came from all over the world. The buildings of the fair were designed in a neoclassical manner and could have easily invoked the feeling of being in downtown Rome at the height of the empire during some celebration. Income tax did not exist in America yet at that time, and the majority of Americans did not yet have electricity in their homes. No electricity, no air conditioning. Ellis Island had only started bringing in immigrants 1 year before. Neither of the two world wars had been fought yet, and none of the self proclaimed prophets of the day were predicting that they would be. At the World's Fair, Wrigley's Juicy Fruit Gum would be introduced for the first time, along with Pabst Blue Ribbon, Aunt Jemima pancakes, Cracker Jacks, the Zipper, spray paint, penny tokens, and the world's largest, and only at that time, Ferris wheel, named for its inventor, George Washington Gale Ferris Jr. Visitors to the fair could arrive via train on the south end of what is now Jackson Park's golf course, where the outlines of the tracks are still visible in the golf course when viewed from satellite images. The main entrances were on either side of the Midway Plaisance at 59th and 60th Street. The Midway Plaisance was a covered walkway with an Irish village, an old Vienna, and many other attractions. Horse-drawn trolleys that ushered people up and down the streets were all over the place, as were the people themselves. There was an archway to rival any in Europe, featuring statues of chariots and men, called the Triumph of Columbus. A statue called the Republic stood in an area called the Great Basin. The basin itself was representative of the long voyage Columbus made to the New World. Inside the fair stood an agricultural building to demonstrate the advances in that industry, an electricity building, a casino, a music hall. One of the largest buildings there was the Manufacturers of Liberal Arts building. There were floral gardens on the wooded island. There was a women's building with arts and crafts to participate in, and a horticulture building, a fisheries building, the Illinois building, and a government building. There were many smaller buildings as well, with the ones mentioned being the grandest. And there was a palace of fine arts, which still stands today as the Museum of Science and Industry. During the fair, the Palace of Fine Arts held more works of art than any other place in the Western world. It was designed that no exhibit would cast a shadow or reflection on another, with colonnades adorning the outside, producing shaded walkways. Americans had never seen such a marvelous city. The last time Europeans saw one of such awe was over 1,500 years before, and much of the rest of the world still has not seen one. President Cleveland was at the fair, and soldiers to keep spectators off of him. On opening day, there were diplomats present from Germany, Great Britain, France, Italy, Austria, Japan, Russia, Norway, Belgium, Mexico, Persia, Spain, Brazil, Switzerland, New South Wales, and Korea. Frederick Douglass walked among the crowds and was recognized by many. The works of art in the Palace of Arts came from Belgium, Sweden, Norway, Italy, Denmark, France, Germany, Holland, Japan, Spain, Great Britain, and more. 9 portraits by the American painter John S. Sargent were displayed among the thousands of works of art. The building was capped with a statue of the goddess Diana. At the opening ceremony, President Cleveland, at the conclusion of his speech, stated, "Let us hold fast to the meaning which underlies this ceremony, and let us not lose the impressiveness of this moment, as by a touch the machinery that gives life to this vast exposition is now set in motion. So at the same instant let our hopes and aspirations awaken forces which in all time to come shall influence the welfare, the dignity, and the freedom of mankind." With that, he hit a button on a table that was draped with an American flag, and the fair sprung to life. Fountains everywhere within the fair shot up sprays of water, and around 200,000 light bulbs lit, creating a scene unlike man anywhere on earth had ever seen before. Archduke Ferdinand said of his single day visit, "I could not refrain from admiring the offered view that was lessened only by the realization that this splendor would exist only for such a short time and not be guarded for the future." The masses altogether suspended judgment, for the world they were experiencing was not the world they had known prior to that moment. In 1893, the 1893 Parliament of World Religions spent 18 days in September at the fair. Though unpopular, as non-Christian interfaith dialogues were the norm. But the goings-on inside the fair was not all that came to Chicago for the fair. Rather, cunning men and women, merchants, traders, con artists, serial killers, and Buffalo Bill even came. Buffalo Bill had actually intended to set up his show inside of the fair, but disputes between him and the committees in charge of pricing led him to follow through with an alternative plan. He set up outside the fair's entrance instead, having purchased the land for his shows himself. It is important to note that Buffalo Bill was there. He was likely the most famous person in America at the time, and his presence will play a role in Dowie's rise to fame. Yet while Buffalo Bill was performing his shows, while thousands watched, there was a serial killer lurking in the audience. H. Holmes is often cited as being America's first serial killer. He built the World's Fair Hotel, which was less of a hotel and more of a murder castle. He preyed upon the suspended judgment of fair attendees and lured them back into his hotel, which had soundproofed rooms, stairwells that led to nowhere, gas rooms, and a cellar where he stored the many dead that he killed. Exhausted fairgoers looking for a place to rest their heads and not being too judgmental followed him back, never to be heard from again. Accounts put the number of his murders anywhere from 20 to over 200. No one really knows for sure how many people this man killed. Most of most of his victims were already induced to hypnosis through the extravagance demonstrated at the fair and adrenaline highs from all the excitement. Yet, while H. Holmes was on the prowl to destroy the bodies of fair attendees, there was another man on the prey to destroy their souls. His name was John Alexander Dowie.